Okay, so welcome. Thanks for coming out. I will keep this short and sweet. I'm turning it over to Samantha Trunkett, who is the lead intern for the Citizenship and Crisis Initiative this year, and she's going to do our introductions and was instrumental in organizing this great panel on Equal Pay Day.
Hey, Chris. Yay!
Okay, hi, I'm Samantha, and I am a senior studying political science here at Oregon State, and I just completed my coursework, so it's really exciting. So just want to shout out our social media for starting up. So if you want to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Periscope, we're still working on Periscope, so next event, do that. So a little bit of background about this event. When I first started working with the Citizenship and Crisis Initiative, Dr. Nichols asked me, what issue pertaining to citizenship concerned me the most? For those of you who do not know the Citizenship and Crisis Initiative, what the Citizenship and Crisis Initiative is, it is an initiative that plans events like this panel discussion so that as a community we can think deeply, discuss, and debate questions about the issues, rights, obligations, and changing definitions of citizens and citizenship. So when Dr. Nichols asked me this question, I immediately thought of the gender wage differential. I believe that women are not equal to men until the wage gap is bridged. Without this bridge, I feel like there's something missing within a woman's citizenship. And there will always be a potential for a woman to be treated less than they deserve in a work environment. At the time, I was a soon-to-be graduate who never worked in an environment in which that I could be discriminated because of my gender. But now, I have just finished my coursework, and I'm facing a sad reality that I could be affected by the gender wage differential. After researching this issue more, I have come to realize that the gender wage differential facts are even more frightening than I initially thought. According to the American Association of Women, women make 79 cents for every dollar a man makes, and the gap widens for women of color and mothers. However, what I did not know is if the gender wage differential directly affected Oregon State University alumni. With the help of Dr. Nichols and the Oregon State University Alumni Foundation, we sent out an anonymous survey to Oregon State University alumni to gain some insight. The survey acquired 310 responses, and here are a few things that we learned from it. So, that's not as clear as I would have liked it to be, sorry. But some brief overview. When we asked respondents if they felt like there is a gender pay differential in the United States today, this is how they responded. In total, 193 respondents reported that in their opinion, there is a gender pay differential in the United States today. When we asked respondents if they felt like they earned more or less because of their gender, this is how they responded. 32 females and 2 males reported that they earned less than their coworkers compared to their coworkers because of their gender. When we asked respondents if they felt like they earned more or less because they had children, this is how they responded. 13 females and 3 males reported that they earned less compared to their coworkers because of their children, because they had children. Not because I don't really know the children directly, but you know what I mean. When we asked respondents if they felt like they earned more or less because of their race, this is how they responded. 5 females and 9 males reported that they felt like they earned less compared to their coworkers because of their race. When we asked, assuming there is a gender pay differential, what are the best ways to address it? We wanted some answers, whether they thought they could fix it, and we got a number of fairly creative and sometimes obscene solutions ranging from equal pay for equal work, publishing actual salaries for all positions earned, help ensure that there are adequate opportunities for college education, make it a law to prevent it, transparency, blind hiring, blind promotion policies, insisting that employers follow gender-neutral pay scales and punish the corporate officers that fail to comply. My least favorite answer is the topic perpetuates a perceived problem, which today we're here to refute that. So While this survey is largely anecdotal, it does show that some state university alumni experience and consider the so-called gender wage gap to be a significant concern. It also serves to reveal that the complicated set of factors from childcare to salary transparency at work in generating gender wage differentials represent an issue we all need to consider in great detail. And in this light, expertise will help. Today we have Dr. Sheree Clow, Dr. Rory Solberg, Dr. Todd Pugach, and
Thanks for the PhD.
and Ann Giles are here to help give us more insight into this issue. For those of you who do not know our panelists, here is a brief rundown of each. Dr. Clow is a professor of philosophy here at Oregon State who also directs a lab on experimental ethics. Dr. Clow works on issues of bias in science, including sexism and racism. Dr. Solberg is an associate professor of political science who focuses her research in judicial politics and processes. Dr. Solberg has authored numerous journal articles on this area of research, and I have been fortunate enough to have taken some classes with her while at Oregon State University. Dr. Pugach is an assistant professor of economics in the School of Public Policy at Oregon State University. Dr. Pugach's research interests are in development economics, I'm so sorry, words are hard for me today. Labor economics and the economics of education. Ann Giles has been at Oregon State University for 30 years and is currently the Associate Director for Affirmative Action at Advancement and has done some analysis of salary equity during her time in this office. This event could not happen without the continued support of the OSU Alumni Foundation, the School of History, Philosophy, and Religion, Oregon State University, and of course, Dr. Nichols of the Citizenship and Crisis Initiative. So thank you, everyone, for making this happen. And now the discussion.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm Sharon Clough. I'm in philosophy, and I thought I would start out by looking at some of the conceptual issues. I'm going to take this little thing.
Go good plan.
All right. There's no need for you guys to turn around. It's just saying stuff I'm saying. Nothing exciting.
I want to
Okay.
be like an undergrad.
So the pattern under discussion here is the stubborn, persistent gap in salaries. Hey, welcome. In the U.S., whereby for every dollar a man makes, a woman makes significantly less. You can fill in the figure. The figures change, but it's a stubborn pattern within a fairly small window. The claim seems straightforward, but the details and potential solutions get debated all the time in Congress, ongoing. So what to make of this claim? Let's look at what's actually being said here. First, it's a causal claim. It's a causal claim that gender is playing some kind of causal role in determining whether someone gets more or less money. Most of us think that fairness demands that pay should be awarded based on features that employees can control. For example, how hard they work. Gender is not something people can control. Therefore, the gap in salaries between men and women represents a kind of unfairness. So it's a causal claim about a lack of fairness. We call the particular kind of unfairness at issue here sexism. Okay, so it's also a causal claim about a lack of fairness aggregated across different kinds of jobs and across different kinds of women and men. It's a statistical pattern that gives us very little information about individuals. There will be many individuals in this room for whom this gender disparity doesn't apply. It's a broad pattern formed by aggregating lots of data. Some of this aggregation is appropriate and helpful in figuring out how to address the problem. Some of the aggregation not so helpful and can be misleading. So let's look at the claim that the fact that the claim aggregates across different kinds of women and men. One element of the aggregation that can be misleading is that it relies on a notion of gender as an isolatable feature of a woman's or man's experience, when we know that is not how gender is experienced. So gender is not an isolatable feature. This came up in some of the ways that the survey was framed, which I appreciated. So the pay differential for black women is worse than for white women, so there's not just a category women that's going to capture that. And controlling for race, as some of these aggregates try to do, when they're calculated and averaged, is an artificial project. Gender is a stand-in for a whole class of variables that together contribute to a lack of fairness. In the case of men who are Black, or men who are Latino, or men who are disabled, they, on average, are not going to feel the benefits of this aggregated pay differential, and white women like myself are hurt less by the pay differential on average than are Black women. So when we talk about gender and sexism, we need to remember the artificial nature of statistically isolating gender in these accounts. Otherwise, the aggregation can be misleading, and we need to be mindful of that. Let's now look at the way that it aggregates, this claim aggregates across different kinds of jobs. Just a side note, and this actually came out in the one response that you got at the end, we all want this kind of aggregation to be flawed. No one wants to think they live in a world that is structured so unfairly. No men want to think that their being men affects their pay in a positive way. No women want to think they are doomed from the start. So there's a psychological pressure on everyone to deny or play down the situation. And given that sexism in pay is supported by and interlaced with a number of other sexist features of society, then there's also social pressure to deny or downplay the situation. So the psychological and social pressures we all feel to downplay or explain away the situation is another thing we should be mindful of as we're talking about this. So back to aggregating across different jobs. So we all hope that the kind of job makes a difference. We feel this psychological and social pressure to look for almost any other explanation for the difference in pay besides a lack of fairness. For the love of God, please. So if we can explain the difference by appealing to the fact that women typically work in low-paying jobs and men in high-paying jobs, then we can say that the pay differential is due to something people can control. Therefore, it's not unfair, it's not sexist. Choosing what job you take is something you control, and if you're happy with a low-paying job, then so be it. And insofar as this aggregate figure clumps high and low-paying jobs together, it's not actually telling us about unfairness in terms of sexism. But it turns out that even looking within single kinds of jobs, the pattern persists. So there is study after study that shows that on average, the pay differential that unfairly favors men exists within jobs. And the pay differential favors men even when they have the same experience and education level as the women who are their colleagues in the same job. And worse, this one killed me, I didn't know this one. When more women begin choosing higher paying jobs and getting higher paying jobs, the occupation becomes valued less. Again, this is on average. The pay drops then for everybody, though on average it drops more for women than men. I have some examples later that we can talk about in the question period. But again, we really don't want to believe that the pay differential is due to an unfair advantaging and disadvantaging of features people can't control. So many of us hope that maybe the problem isn't sexism, instead it's that within those jobs, maybe women are just working less hard than men. Choosing how hard you want to work is something you control, and if you're a woman and you choose to work less than your male colleague, then so be it, you'll get paid less. Suck it up. This gets brought up when examining pay differentials among lawyers and financial analysts, for example. These are two fields where it turns out the data show that in fact women who are lawyers or financial analysts typically don't put in the same hours as their male counterparts. Well, now things are getting interesting. You might think that in law firms and financial institutions working 40 hours a week, let's say you decide I'm just going to work 40 hours a week, and I'm going to suck it up, I'm going to get half of what some colleague who decides to work their life away and work 80 hours a week. I'm going to get half of that. What am I going to do? Turns out the person who works 80 hours gets like 3 times as much as the person who works 40. So choosing to work full-time rather than choosing to work your life away, 80 hours, punishes you disproportionately. And of course, because women are still, on average, the primary caregivers of children, and because having children means that you will probably need to go home at 6 p.m. rather than 10 p.m., then women who have children are penalized disproportionately. But wait, there might be still some fairness. Wait, can't women just decide not to have children? If you choose to have children, that was something you can control. So if having kids affects the hours you can work, that's your choice. So if it's a choice, then it's not unfair, and if it's not unfair, it's not sexist. yeah, it's sexist. Sorry. Yeah. So here we've hit a kind of sexism that's much more complicated. We've now moved from the issue of pay differentials to the other kinds of structural sexism in place in society that I referred to earlier. If hetero, cisgendered couples elect to have a baby, and by the way, the pressure to do so comes from basically everywhere, then on average, the woman in that couple is going to be punished for that decision more than the man. So then we can't just look at sexism as a problem for pay equity, but sexism is a much larger problem that is implicated in any number of broader social structures. This is my last little bit of animation. Sexism is pervasive and complicated, so there's work to be done. These are my colleagues who are actually doing that work, so yay them, and thank you very much. Yeah, here's the thing.
I just did one. It's not here though.
So hit the right, hit
The right one.
There we go.
All right. So I was impressed by Sheree's thing, so I played around with shapes.
I'm impressive.
You are.
What are you going to do? Oh, stop.
Okay. So
I should be paid for it. Yeah, I'm doing it.
All right. I'm Professor Solberg. Thank you for the introduction, Sam. Before I go into my prepared comments, I do want to say I'm here supposedly to, as my brief from Professor Nichols was, to talk about the legal logistics of pay inequity and to sort of pile on to what Professor Clough said. The law does isolate gender and race and feels like you can do that. And yeah, it's really backward and bad. But hey, so I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to be very blunt and I'm not going to fly through things. I just put it all up there and just, you know, dazzle you as it may. There are two major federal statutes that protect women and others from discrimination in terms of wage. It's the Equal Pay Act of 1963 and the Lilly Ledbetter Act of 2009. Title VII, which is in the middle there, protects women from gender discrimination more broadly. So the Equal Pay Act, 1963, prevents sex-based wage discrimination for the performance of jobs with equal skills, effort, and responsibility. The good news is that this means it doesn't matter if your job titles differ. That if you can prove that the basic work that you are doing, regardless of the title, is substantially the same, and that's the metric that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, uses, the courts and the EEOC will say equal pay for equal work. It also means that if a male is paid more than a female worker for equal work, then the differential has to be adjusted in terms of pay. Meaning a company can't say, oh, well, you know, yeah, you're being paid a little less, but we're going to give you a company car so you can get home at 6 o'clock at the better time. Or we're going to give you an extra bonus. And
Screw you and your company car.
that's what you say because, and this is important for people who are graduating to know, right, that bonuses and those other benefits do not go on your base pay. And your base pay is what is used for raises, and your base pay is what is used for retirement contribution, and your base pay is what is used for Social Security. So if you take lots of bonuses to equal you out, it's going to hit you in the ass later on. So don't do that. Okay. I should also note that this wonderful interpretation came from the EEOC and the courts, not from the legislation. As originally passed, Congress was talking about equal pay for equal work, meaning you had to have the exact same job titles. Okay? And it didn't go across job classifications. So this resulted from federal appellate court interpretations that was then eventually adopted by the United States Supreme Court. Okay, so that's the Equal Pay Act. The Lilly Ledbetter Act of 2009 was the very first piece of legislation President Obama signed into law, and it was passed to overturn a Supreme Court decision, which was a really nitpicky procedural decision that was stupid. Okay. So Lilly Ledbetter worked for Goodyear for almost 20 years, and in many of those years, she received no pay raises. And Goodyear would say that it was because she had poor job performance evaluations. So she began her service equal to men, but over time, that differential grew to the point where she was making between $1,000 and $2,000 a month less than men doing the same job. Right before and upon retirement, she sued under Title VII because she was claiming more than just pay problems, that her poor job performance ratings were based upon her sex rather than her work. The EEOC found probable discrimination, gave her a right to sue letter. She sued, and a jury agreed with her. Okay, so they said, yes, there was sex discrimination in her performance evaluations, therefore there was violations of equal pay as well. Goodyear didn't like this decision, shockingly, because back pay over 20 years is expensive. So they appealed, claiming that essentially Ledbetter waited too long to file her suit. Title VII requires that all claims be made within 180 days of the alleged unlawful employment practice. And since Ledbetter waited until she was retiring, because she didn't know she was paid less until she was retiring, she was clearly too late. Okay? The Supreme Court essentially read the statute literally and said, yes, that first paycheck is when the clock started ticking, so she was SOL before she ever started. And SOL, that's a technical term. So one of the first act that Obama signed into law was the Lilly Ledbetter Act that corrected this decision and essentially used the EEOC's interpretation, which is every new paycheck that is unequal is a new violation and restarts your clock. So fabulous, lovely, great legislation. So you might say, well, then that's great, we're all protected.
What's the problem?
What's the problem? Exactly. Title VII, the Equal Pay Act, the Ledbetter Act, women are well covered. Yeah, kind of not. Because bringing suit for discrimination, even equal pay issues, is not easy. It's a bit easier under the Equal Pay Act than, say, under Title VII, but not by much. Okay? Under the Equal Pay Act, once you sort of find, oh, I'm being paid differently, you can immediately sue in federal court. That's fine. But then you've got to deal with the procedures. Okay? The other way you can go about it is you could then file a claim with the EEOC, who will then investigate and then might find that you have a probable discrimination. But be careful there, because your clock also starts ticking, and if the EEOC takes too long, then you're screwed and can't bring your suit. But,
And does all this cost you money?
oh, of course. Right. Well, not filing a claim with the EEOC, but bringing a suit, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Just a little bit of money. Attorneys don't charge a lot. Unless they're men.
Hire a female.
And hire a female attorney. She'll be cheaper. She'll be about 53% cheaper. Okay. So you can file this claim, okay? Once your lawsuit is filed, the burden of proof is with you to start. The person claiming discrimination has to present what is called a prima facie case. In other words, you bear the burden to prove that there's sufficient evidence to support your claim. You have to make at least a facial claim that there's not equal pay. Okay? So to do so under the Equal Pay Act, according to precedent, you must show the work you were doing is substantially equal to your male colleagues in terms of skills, duties, supervision, effort, and responsibilities. Okay. The conditions where you worked were the same for you and the male, and that the males were paid more. Okay. And the same steps applies to a male who's making the same claim. So think about what this means. You have to do an analysis and show that these jobs are the same, and if there's too much differential, you're going to have problems. And you have to actually know what everybody else is paid, which is not necessarily easy. Yes, you work in Oregon State, you can find out that information, but you're working for a private employer, you don't know what everybody else makes. Okay? If you get past this prima facie case, which is a big if, the employer then bears the legal burden to disprove any part of it. The employer can do this by showing that the pay differential resulted from seniority systems, a merit-based system, a system that measures the quantity or quality of your work, or any other reason but gender. Okay? All they have to do is prove that there was another reason. Right? And they're done. Okay? So as you can imagine, providing an alternative explanation is not often that difficult, right? If the jobs are quite similar, but the company can claim that significant parts of time are spent on different tasks, then the claim will fail, okay? So if a woman picks up some duties of another job, she acts as a receptionist and fills in and does the work of an order desk clerk, she is not performing the same duties as the order desk clerk because she still spends significant times on other jobs. Okay? There's even a claim that failed more recently where a woman had a job and then she was fired. Yes, some discrimination possibly there. But they then split her job into two, hired two men, and paid them both significantly more than she made. So when she brought the claim, though, the company was able to prove that in addition to doing the jobs that she did, these individuals were doing some other stuff, and so the jobs were not significantly similar.
And as the moderator for this, you need to hustle.
Oh, sorry, yeah, okay. I should note that the steps for a Title VII claim are pretty much similar, except that after the employer rebuts your claim, you then have to prove that it's pretextual. You have to prove that they're making this stuff up. Okay, so these claims are not easy to bring. The EEOC has not had more than 1,200 complaints under the EPA from 1997 to 2015, and over half of them each year are found to be non-discriminatory. Only between 15 and 25% of the claims have a result that is any kind of win, and they consider a win where there's no benefit to the person, but they said, oh, look, there's discrimination. Yay. Now you can go sue. And the federal courts have only had between 8,000 and 17,000 cases filed under this law from 1990 to 2015. So again, not a lot of cases coming in. And the amount of money averages about $7 million a year that is paid out in Equal Pay Act claims, which you might say sounds a lot, but under general Title VII discrimination clauses, it's about $175 million a year. So the Equal Pay Act is not this bridge. Neither is, quite frankly, Title VII. So essentially, the EEOC and the federal courts are not the places to fix this wage gap. Current law does not provide protections for women. It leaves way too much room, or as Stephen Colbert would say, a loop chasm for companies to rebut. And the ability to obtain proof of wage discrimination is quite difficult. If you want to hear a nice rail against this, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissent in the Lilly Ledbetter case is wonderful, and I think I was going to read some of it, but I don't have time.
I think that's right.
And but there's also a guy on YouTube who put it to music, so it's lovely.
All right. And Gillies is going to do her thing.
I will do my thing. It is unfortunately on a more dull topic than there used to be.
Oh, I don't know why people think the law is exciting.
That was good, though. It's so expensive to prove that you've been screwed.
Yes.
Who has the time? Plus you have to do all that work while you're still doing your job. Okay, sorry.
Or you have another job because you got fired from that other. Yes.
And then you have your second shift, don't forget that.
Oh, right.
Second shift, right?
Because
Going home
children,
to-
my God, the children.
Right, exactly. So one thing that I've noticed in the conversations that we have about this, by the way, Ann Gillies, Office of Equal Opportunity and Access, and I've worked with affirmative action in a variety of ways since 1996 here at OSU, but I've actually been here since dinosaur days.
You mean when the mammoth bones actually were...
We're laid down, yes.
Wow.
I put them there. I'm just saying. So we always talk about median women's pay as being a percentage of men's pay. We put maleness and male compensation at the center as though it's normative, and then we talk about women in this deficit way. Why don't we say that the median man's pay is 128% of women's pay?
Oh my God, that sounds much worse.
I know, does it not? And it also brings into question whether or not the issue is just help those poor women, right? It's not help those poor women, it's look at a system that has built-in privilege and oppression and that's being enacted in a variety of ways, including through pay. Taking into account, well, adjusting for a variety of factors that people often look at and use to discount this notion of a wage gap. Age, education, experience, job title, employer, and location. By the way, age is in fact a factor that you shouldn't discriminate against people on based on the law. Still, according to the old way of talking about this, the median women's pay is 94.6 of the median man's pay, or the median man's pay is 1.6%. or 106% is what I'm trying to say, of median women's pay. So think about that and think about even what kind of notions are we creating about how the world works and what is good and what is valuable and how should we be, simply by which way we choose to present these figures.
Nice.
So, I really had a hard time with animation on this. I was doing it at a quarter to 4. So what are the reasons that some of these pay gaps exist? We've talked about some of them already. We'll just stick them all up here. We've got the socially constructed gender norms about whether or not it's appropriate to negotiate. And there are plenty of cases in which men are both encouraged to negotiate for salary and are rewarded to. They're coached to learn to do this as part of their professional development typically. And when they do it, they tend to do it successfully and they end up starting at higher salaries. Women, if they don't just operate from the assumption that the salary offer is fair, and do go ahead and negotiate, often are seen as violating some significant gender norms, being pushy and aggressive and, dare I say, bitchy, and disrespectful and so on. And so it actually harms them in the workplace,
Not
even if they're
civil.
somewhat successful, not
Civil or collegial.
Oh,
Not
and you're yelling. You're yelling.
You're yelling.
You need to stop.
Sure,
yelling.
because that's what you do anytime you say something people don't want to hear. Right.
And if you do negotiate successfully, you'll get kicked on the back.
Yeah, something else will happen. Shit will come down. Oh, sorry. So we do see that at the initial salary stage, there's evidence to suggest that men often receive a somewhat higher initial salary offer even before any of this negotiation happens, even though small. It was already discussed that salary increases, as well as a variety of other benefits, tend to be done as a percentage of base pay. So you may start with a gap that's very small, but over time, as you apply percentage increases, the gaps get bigger and bigger and bigger. So the whole system is designed to exacerbate those kinds of gaps. Salary increases, I talked about that. And then the feminization of disciplines, which Uncle has mentioned, the sense that as women move into a particular field, strangely, the demand goes down and the salary rates go down. There is research that suggests that this is less the case now than it was 20 years ago, but it still appears to be a factor. How does OSU deal with this? Well, we've got 3 different categories of regular employees. Our classified staff operate under a collective bargaining agreement that is very kind of regimented when it comes to compensation. So the salary grades are tied to the classifications for each body of work. A person comes in at the first step and goes up 1 step a year until they top out at the end of the scale, unless they come in with lots and lots and lots of experience and are able to negotiate starting at the 2nd step. The only exception to this is the IT, information technology positions, which are in a pay-for performance kind of a system that is a little bit more complex and has a little bit room for judgment on the part of supervisors. For professional faculty, these are the unclassified, not represented by union folks who are not ranked faculty. I'm one of those. There was a class and comp system developed by a collaborative group about 3 or 4 years ago that looked at both market and institutional value for different kinds of work, created job families of types of work, and levels of work and kinds of supervision and so on, and then established broad salary bands, really broad salary bands, like $40,000 ranges, and attached one of these position profiles to the ranges. Then they've provided some general guidance about how to manage pay within the quartiles of those really broad bands. So there's a certain amount of latitude at the initial point of hire and at the point of providing merit to put people at different places within that, based on a variety of criteria that are not sort of numeric criteria, they're subjective, judgmental kind of criteria. People can receive increases. When those increases happen on a university-wide basis, a memo comes out from the 6th floor of Kerr that says here are the criteria. It's either a general pay increase, which we don't call cost of living, or it's a merit-based pay increase that has specific criteria each time merit is issued. Any other sort of increase is called an off-cycle increase and goes through some sort of a review on the 6th floor. The same is, it's actually fairly similar in terms of increases for the ranked faculty, that's professors and people that are research faculty and instructors and so on. Yes, all these folks. When it comes to looking at increases, it works the same way. When it comes to establishing initial salaries, the business centers who review all the HR actions look at the range of salaries within the rank that they're doing a search in and use that to evaluate the proposed salary range for the position, and then the supervisor has the latitude, or the hiring official has the latitude to negotiate pay with the finalist, somewhere within that range. And that's pretty much it. I mean, it's very broad. There's a lot of deference given. So that's just sort of how does the system work. Then the question is, what do people do when they have concerns about pay equity? Where do they go? Well, inside OSU, the first place a person could go is to their supervisor, or to their supervisor's supervisor, or up the ladder from there. If they're a represented staff member in the union, they could ask for assistance from the union in negotiating the process of raising concern. Anybody can come to the Office of Equal Opportunity and Access to explore the possibility of filing a claim of discrimination, or to actually just go ahead and do so. Something you should know about the courts generally, which I'll just segue aside for this, is that the presumption seems to be in the US legal system that discrimination doesn't exist unless you can prove it, and prove exactly how it happened, which is a very, very high standard of proof. It's one of the real challenges in having a whole set of laws that seem to protect us from discrimination that are very difficult to enforce.
Because think about who wrote the laws.
Well, yes, and we'll think about who enforces them too. People can go to the University Ombuds Office, that's a confidential, private, informal place to discuss what people's various options are and what the implications may be. Some people go directly up to the top, to the 6th floor, or to their dean. But there are a lot of different places people can go to begin to raise concerns, or they can go outside of OSU. In Oregon, there's the Bureau of Labor and Industries. We already talked about the EEOC. People can engage private attorneys. There also is the Office of Federal Contracts Compliance Programs that audits affirmative action compliance, and they come in and audit for discrimination, and they will also deal with salary discrimination. In fact, that's their primary focus these days. So sometimes people can benefit from that if it's found to exist. And then this is the analysis, which I think you really kind of already talked about, but the way that we've captured it from the EEOC for OSU is basically the process is to identify people who are comparators, that's similarly situated employees who have substantially similar jobs with common core duties that require similar skill, effort, and responsibility, performed under similar working conditions, and a similar degree of complexity and difficulty with no objective differences such as minimum qualifications. In other words, according to the person that we go to the workshop with each year for affirmative action compliance, you pretty much need to be able to parachute into the other job and start doing it right away in order to really be considered a comparator. Then, once the comparators are identified, then we explore compensation differences, if they exist, by protected identity statuses. So protected identities are race, sex, religion. I can't say them all because the list is long and I'll forget some, but you know what I'm talking about.
But there's no intersection.
No, of course not. And you have to identify which one it is.
And you can be a woman or you can be
a
person of color, but you cannot be both. Huh. Under the law. Huh. So
well, you also can't be a Latino and a person of color because ethnicity trumps race in the self-disclosure.
Oh, for fuck's
Record
sake.
keeping. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Can you shop? Can you go with one, and if that doesn't
Well,
work,
no,
can you choose
because
another?
under the equal pay, if there's a black woman and then she says, well, I'm being discriminated because I'm a woman, they'll look and say, oh, but look, these white women are making plenty. They're equal, so they're not treating women differently. And then you say if you're African American, they say, oh, but look at these African American men. They're being treated, they have the same pay. Exactly. So you're not being discriminated against at all because the courts they're binary. They cannot recognize intersectionality.
Right. At OSU, we try and use a more inclusive standard. When we do this kind of analysis, we're really looking for the reality of intersecting identities and everything else when we evaluate. That's because we hold ourselves to a higher standard than the law, because we know where the flaws are. In any case, if we do find these differences exist on the basis of one or several intersecting identities, this is, again, remember, inside OSU, we ask the employing unit to explain it. So what does the supervisor say is the reason? And then we evaluate whether that makes sense, is it credible, and is it non-discriminatory? Do we believe you? And do we think that this is not a discriminatory reason? And then even if it is, does it explain the entire disparity? We also look at what kinds of practices and policies are used to set salaries, and might they cause a disparate impact, which is a facially neutral policy that ends up having the effect of advantaging some people and disadvantaging others. If it does have a disparate impact, is it consistent with business necessity? And could the same goals be accomplished through other methods that would be less discriminatory? It's a very complicated analysis. So, and this is when somebody
That's why
comes
you're
forward
making the
with a
big
complaint.
bucks, Anne.
Oh, that's what I'm making. Yes, that's exactly right. We also, the OFCCP, Office of Federal Contracts Compliance Programs, as I said, has been focusing in very heavily on pay equity and and compensation concerns. And they are expecting us to do annual salary equity analysis as an institution. So we're setting up a 5-year schedule that's currently under development because there is in fact only one of me. It's based on these guidelines and it's divided up by academic faculty. So we're doing one division every year over a 5-year period and we'll start back over. Professional faculty, we're doing a couple of job families each year. And classified staff, they give full deference to the negotiated salary scales, so we're only doing the IT professionals. But they, pardon me? What? Well, they're all men anyway, right?
Exactly, which is why they get to negotiate for higher scale.
So if the feds come in, so the way the feds do this, so I'm going to be really fast, Sharon, I promise. I'm almost done.
Okay.
When the feds come in to audit us, they look at, they average the salaries for women and men in a particular job title, and then they say, well, if there's more than a 2% or $2,000 difference between the average salaries, they flag it for mini regression analysis, which consists of the following characteristics, most of which are just identifiers, employee ID, job title, some of these other things. But most of the things, a lot of things that are in there are not the things that we would see at OSU as being primarily the things we would want to have affect pay. So in our regression analysis that we're developing or working with a retired statistician from OSU to develop, we're going to be adding these additional factors, which are education, job performance, market differences, and my favorite, any other factors that could legitimately affect pay. Exactly. The problem is he went to the result and he came back with some kind of a problem that is taking him a long time to get better from. So
This is the statistician.
the statistician.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we'll see. We'll just be hung out to dry in the meantime. That's it for me.
Yay, Anne. Okay, Todd, you actually have 6 minutes.
Sorry.
No more,
To cover
no
all of
less.
the economics.
So I'm Todd Bugach. I am the male representative on the panel and the economist. So I thought about showing up today in full Darth Vader costume just to round out the picture for you, but you might get the idea. So in my 6 minutes, will try to explain how economists think about gender pay differentials and then show you some data. And what I'm about to say has been covered to some extent by all the panelists so far, and they've made some implicit critiques of what I'm about to say, so they're all well posed and well taken, but I'll try to nonetheless give the economist's perspective here. So let me start by explaining a couple conceptual issues of the way economists think of the gender pay gap. So we think about labor market discrimination as being the answer to the following question. Do employers treat workers with the same productive characteristics differently by gender? And so the focus here is on same productive characteristics. And what we mean by that are things like education, not just how long you've been in school, but the type of degree that you hold, your skills, cognitive and non-cognitive, your labor market experience, your working hours, the industry and the occupation that you work in. And if we still see workers with the same productive characteristics along these lines being paid differently according to gender, that would be consistent with the presence of labor market discrimination. Now, this also gives rise to the notion of the difference between unadjusted and adjusted pay gap. So the unadjusted gap would just be the simple difference between male and female wages. The adjusted difference is when we try to compare like to like along these productive characteristics. Now, to the extent that men and women differ systematically in those productive characteristics and leading to differences in the adjusted versus unadjusted gap, we call those pre-market differences, which is whether or not workers of different genders enter the labor market with the same productive characteristics. And so we make this stark conceptual distinction, but there are important complementarities between these two things, and the panelists have already spoken to these in powerful ways. So one possibility is that if you know that acquiring a productive characteristic is going to be valued less in the labor market, then you have less incentive to acquire that productive characteristic in the first place. So if we observe systematic differences after controlling for all these things, it may still be a residue of labor market discrimination rather than something that we can just lump into another bin. And of course, this muddies our interpretation of these differences. So keep that caveat in mind, as well as the others that the panelists have brought up. I'm about to show you some numbers. So I'll call these 3 stylized facts. Economists used to call these economic laws, but we got a little more humble, and so now we call these stylized facts. Things that are approximately true, though you might be able to find exceptions. So the first stylized fact is, and the word got cut off a little bit here, but it says the unadjusted gender pay gap has declined over time. So this is data going back to 1955, and you can see that women earn, this is full-time workers only, so disregarding any differences in part-time versus full-time. Women were earning less than 60 cents on the dollar. And I haven't done the calculation in my head to put it the other way around as Anne suggested, but it would be dramatic, I can assure you. And this grew since around 1970 to where we are today, the numbers that you often hear and that Sam mentioned in the introduction of about 77 cents on the dollar. This is the unadjusted gap. Now the adjusted gap is smaller, but the second stylized fact is that this adjusted gap has essentially stagnated for at least the last 25 years. So the blue bars are the unadjusted gap, again going back to 1980, and we see steady progress in that. But the adjusted gap, which is represented in either the red or the green, depending on the degree of adjustment you're making, has essentially flattened out since 1989. The adjusted gap brings us up to about 92 cents on the dollar. You get slightly different numbers depending on how you do it. But the point here is that it's been flat for so long. The third stylized fact is that these averages, these aggregates, as Sheree pointed out, not only conceal individual differences, but they conceal differences in other aggregates that are nonetheless important. So if you look at the mean difference, the unadjusted mean difference is in the 4th column here. That's the one I've been talking about, gets us to 79 cents on the dollar. If we look instead at women at different points in the income distribution, 10th, 50th, 90th percentile, we see that women at the bottom and at the middle have actually seen some steady progress relative to men since 1980, but that progress has stalled out and actually gone backwards for women at the top of the income distribution. So, you hear a lot about the lean-in movement, and there was a lot of critique about the lean-in movement, and this was focusing on a very privileged class of professional women, and that's a fair critique, I think, but it nonetheless does place a focus on a group of women who have not seen as much progress over time as other women in the labor force. So I'll leave it there. Look forward to the discussion.
Oh,
You're
nicely
amazing.
done.